You deposit $1,000 in your bank account. The bank takes your money and then lends out $900 of it to someone else. That person spends the $900, and that money gets deposited in another bank, which lends out $810 of it. Wait, where did all this extra money come from? Here's the crazy part. You still have your $1,000. The borrower has $900. Someone else has $810. That's $2,710. Created from your original $1,000. The money didn't exist before. The bank just created it. This is how banks create money out of nothing. And once you understand it, you'll never look at money the same way again. The goldsmith's secret. To understand how this works, we need to go back hundreds of years. Before banks existed, people stored their gold with goldsmiths. These were craftsmen who had secure vaults to protect precious metals. You'd bring your gold coins to the goldsmith, he'd store them safely, and in return, he'd give you a paper receipt, a promise that you could come back anytime and get your gold. But here's what the goldsmiths realized: not everyone came back for their gold at the same time. Most of the gold just sat in the vault, collecting dust, doing nothing. So the goldsmiths had an idea, a brilliant, dangerous idea. What if they lent out the gold that was just sitting there? They could charge interest, make money, and as long as they kept some gold in reserve for anyone who wanted to withdraw, nobody would know. This was the birth of fractional reserve banking. Keep a fraction of the deposits, lend out the rest, and just like that, money could be created from thin air. How modern banks create money. Fast forward to today. Banks don't deal with gold anymore. They deal with digital numbers on screens. But the system? It's exactly the same. Here's how it works. You deposit $1,000 in your checking account at Bank A. Bank A is required by law to keep a small percentage as reserves. Let's say 10%. So they keep $100 and can lend out $900. Now someone walks in and takes out a $900 loan to buy a car. Bank A doesn't hand them cash. They just credit their account. They type $900 into the system. New money, created digitally, out of nothing. That person buys a car. The car dealer deposits that $900 into Bank B. Bank B keeps $90 as reserves, lends out $810. That $810 gets spent, deposited in Bank C, which keeps $81, lends out $729. This process continues, over and over, each time creating new money. Your original $1,000 deposit, it just created about $9,000 in total money supply. This is called the money multiplier, and it's how banks expand the money supply without printing a single dollar bill. The illusion of safety. Now here's where it gets interesting. You still think you have $1,000 in your account. You can check your balance. It says $1,000, but the bank doesn't actually have your $1,000 sitting in a vault. They lent out $900 of it. The bank is making a bet that you won't ask for all your money back at the same time as everyone else. And for the most part, that bet works. Banks only keep a tiny fraction of deposits on hand. In the United States, the reserve requirement used to be 10%. Today, it's actually 0. Banks can technically lend out everything. This system works perfectly until it doesn't. Because what happens if everyone shows up at the same time demanding their money? When the system collapses. October 1929, the stock market crashes. People panic. They rush to banks. Everyone wants their money back, right now. But the banks don't have the money. They lent it out. It's gone. This is called a bank run, and it's the nightmare scenario of fractional reserve banking. During the Great Depression, over 9,000 banks failed. People lost their life savings, not because the banks were robbed, but because the money never really existed in the first place. The same thing happened in 2008. Banks had created too much money through loans, specifically mortgage loans to people who couldn't afford them. When people stopped paying their mortgages, the whole system seized up. Banks realized they didn't actually have the money they thought they had. Bear Stearns collapsed. Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. The entire global financial system nearly imploded. Why? Because modern banking is built on a fragile illusion. The illusion that the money in your account actually exists somewhere. The government steps in. After the Great Depression, governments realized they had a problem. If people lose faith in banks, the entire economy collapses. So they created insurance. In the United States, it's called the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The government promises, if your bank fails, we'll give you your money back, up to $250,000 per account. This does two things. First, it stops bank runs. People don't panic and withdraw all their money because they know it's protected. Second, it gives banks permission to keep creating money, because the government will bail them out if things go wrong. And in 2008, that's exactly what happened. The government spent trillions of dollars bailing out banks. Trillions. Because if the banks collapsed, all that created money would disappear, and the economy would spiral into depression. The system survives because the government guarantees it. But here's the uncomfortable truth. They're guaranteeing something that doesn't really exist. The Federal Reserve's role. Now here's the final piece of the puzzle. Banks create money. But the Federal Reserve creates the money that banks use to create more money. When the Fed wants to inject money into the economy, it doesn't print cash. It simply buys government bonds from banks and credits their accounts. New money, created digitally, just like banks do with loans. In 2008, after the financial crisis, the Fed created $4 trillion through something called quantitative easing. They didn't print $4 trillion, they just added zeros to bank accounts. And those banks used that money to create even more money through loans. This is how the money supply expands during a crisis. The government creates money, banks multiply it, and suddenly there's trillions of new dollars in the system. Where did it come from? Nowhere. It was created out of thin air. So let's recap. Banks don't actually keep your money. They lend it out to other people. Those people spend it. And it gets deposited again, and lent out again. Each time this happens, new money is created. Money that didn't exist before. This system works because we all believe it works. We trust that when we want our money, the bank will have it. But in reality, the bank is making a bet that not everyone will ask for their money at the same time. And when that bet fails, the government steps in with taxpayer money to keep the illusion alive. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Almost all the money in the world exists because banks created it through loans. Not because governments printed it, not because it represents gold or anything physical. It exists because we collectively agreed to pretend it exists. The next time you check your bank account and see your balance, remember this: that number on the screen, it's not sitting in a vault somewhere. It's a promise, a bet, an illusion, and the entire global economy is built on that illusion. Money isn't real, we just act like it is, and that's how banks create money out of nothing.